got Jay on the line, and we touched on this to a certain extent. So if you're just joining us now, which many of you are, please check out the first few minutes of the show. Once we get done here, the video will post in about 15 minutes. But just looking at whether the committee would move Oklahoma over Baylor next week if Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State.
I would think so. I would think that for a variety of different reasons, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State will still be the two teams that will be playing for a Big 12 championship, and Baylor will be kind of on the outside looking in. I mean, I know that head-to-head means something, obviously, but I think at the same time, with Oklahoma going into the Big 12 championship game with one loss versus Baylor not making the Big 12 championship game and then having those two losses, that would probably be the trump card. I would think that you probably have an Oklahoma team that if they were to win this week, I would see them probably in the 6 to 7 range next week. I mean, particularly if Ohio State beats Michigan, you would think that Oklahoma, should they win, would be above the two-loss Michigan team. Maybe it looks a little bit different if it's a field goal game or if it's a last-second loss, but I think Oklahoma's probably in that 6-7 range if they win this game Saturday.
And that's what's difficult about these rankings, among other things. I'm looking at these rankings last week, and I see an Arkansas team that was 21, and the committee drops them to 25. They were 21, and they went and played at the number 2 team in the country on the road, and it was a competitive game down to the last possession, 42-35. Now, I would think it's reasonable. I would actually think, in some sense, you could argue that performance should be rewarded. If you're the number 21 team in the country and you're playing at the number 2 team in the country, you play them within one score. And I know the rankings are difficult because you don't want to reward losses at the same time, but
right.
that seems like a reasonable expectation of the 21st ranked team in the country. I think it's actually a good result for the 21st ranked team in the country.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, similarly, Mississippi State, they were ranked 25th. They literally won. They won their game, and they got dropped out of the top 25. And granted, I get it. They were playing Tennessee State, which is a relative obscurity of it from an FCS perspective. But yeah, I mean, the fact that you won and you drop is bizarre to me. But no, I completely agree on the Arkansas thing. And I think specifically after the way they played at Georgia, really were never competitive in that game, and then come back the way that they played in this game, and to your point, completely competitive down to one possession. And in fact, I mean, I know they trimmed it to one possession, but they were down 7 and they had the ball deep in their own territory, and had a chance with 3 or 4 minutes left to go tie the game. But no, I think I think you're right. I mean, it's strange. It's strange that the thought process that goes through some of the committee's mind at this point in the season.
Jay, I would answer your question by it doesn't matter. So Oklahoma State needs to win the last 2 games. It really doesn't matter where they are ranked in respect to Baylor next week, because Baylor would not have the opportunity to further their season and win a conference championship and notch another big win if Oklahoma wins. So,
yeah.
All right. Let's see. Jimmy's asking about the availability of Andrew Rame.
Yeah, I've not heard, how Riley is about, about these injury situations. So Andrew Rame went out fairly late in the game against Iowa State. I've not heard anything. I've tried to get some information, but just there's not a whole lot there. So I don't know. I think Oklahoma's probably in pretty good shape, even if Rame is not able to play. Robert Conjo came in and came in for him and played really well. So I wouldn't be it wouldn't be a big deal, I think, for me if Andrew Rahm is not able to play, but I haven't heard anything definitively whether or not he's at this point he's going to be able to play or not.
So back to the matchup with Oklahoma State from a psychological standpoint, and I've been mildly critical of Mike Gundy in this way. I think he's a fine football coach. I think he's roughly I'd have to go through the rankings and what I thought of each coach, but roughly a top 15 to 20 coach in the nation. So nothing wrong with that. He's very capable. He's done a great job at Oklahoma State. Took what Les Miles had started there and built on it. It just appeared as though around 2010, 2011, that this Oklahoma State program was turning into, I don't want to overstate it, to elite status, but close to that. Like they were going from what I would consider to be a top 25 program right this second, even though they're having a better than top 25 year, but I'm talking about the overall program year to year. Year to year, they go 8-4. That's probably their, it's like
Right.
their Mendoza line is 8-4. And that's pretty much what they do every year. And it appeared about 10 years ago is that though they were exceeding and pushing past that, and then they leveled off and they become what they become. And that's fine to a certain extent, but I've been a little critical just that it just doesn't seem as though there's that desire. And it's easy for me to say, and these coaches and the coaching staffs, and they put a tremendous amount of work into it, even just to go 8-4. So I don't want to diminish that in any way. At the same time, here we are now in 2021, and they have a huge opportunity here that doesn't pass them by every year like it does, or present itself every year like it does with Oklahoma. But we know that there has been a huge psychological barrier. Now, I would say that Oklahoma's been the better team most of the time anyway. But to go, I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 2-13 against Oklahoma, something in that range.
Yeah, I think he's 2-14 after last year. So yeah, but it's interesting, Mark. I think the cycle of this rivalry, to your point, the psychological side of it is so interesting to kind of look at, because Gundy's 2-14 against Oklahoma, has won one time. They've played Oklahoma and Oklahoma State since Gundy has been here. They played 5 times, with Oklahoma State being the higher ranked team. Oklahoma State has only won one, and that was the 2011 season when Oklahoma State won the Big 12 championship that year. So I think there's a lot of thoughts that kind of go into that. Gundy has been pretty. I hate the word choke and just in general with athletics, but I think he's been ultra conservative. I think in a lot of games against Oklahoma, and I think Oklahoma's kind of outcoached him, whether it be Lincoln Riley or Bob Stoops from year in and year out. I'm probably going to make a comment that's not going to make a lot of people on here happy. I think Oklahoma State is a better overall football team than Oklahoma is this year. So I think, from a talent perspective, I don't know if you want to call it production, if you want to call it talent, they're a better team right now. But do they have can they go do it when they need to, right? Because this has been to your point, Mark, Oklahoma State has been kind of a perennial over the last 10 years, a perennial 8-4 team. Oklahoma State was picked really kind of in the middle of the pack this year, in kind of just the Big 12 just in general. So I think a 7-5, 8-4 team was really expected. So with what they have now, the opportunity that they have in front of them, first time in program history they've ever made the Big 12 championship game in the era that there's been a championship game. They have everything in front of them to potentially make the playoffs should they be able to beat Oklahoma this week and then Baylor next week if it happens. So it's just so intriguing. I think it's the most intriguing, kind of from intangible from a psychological perspective of this rivalry overall. I think of this of this game this year. I think Oklahoma State probably knows they're better. I think based on some of the comments in the media, Spencer Sanders kind of made a comment basically saying that he, when they win, when Oklahoma State wins, a lot of Oklahoma people will bring up history and things like that. There was another defensive player earlier in the week that talked about they feel like they're going to go in and kick Oklahoma's what. So I think there's a lot of confidence now when it comes down to it. If they're in a close game or they're down a little bit in the second half, what does that do to them psychologically? Does it say, oh, here we go again, type of situation? This game, and you may remember this, Mark. I know you don't obviously follow the rivalry as close. This has the makings of the 2013 game. Oklahoma State was ranked number 6 going into the game. Oklahoma was 17. Oklahoma had lost a handful. They lost to Texas early in the year. They lost to then they lost to Baylor. Oklahoma State was a one-loss team. Oklahoma, like I said, they were 6. They were ready to win the conference. They were a better team that year. Oklahoma was struggling. It was Trevor Knight, and then it was Blake Bell, and then Oklahoma even didn't even start either of those kids. Kendall Thompson, interestingly enough, was the starter in that game. Oklahoma played 3 quarterbacks, and I think the thing that was very interesting that I relate maybe a little bit more to this year's team is Oklahoma was not strong on, it was not one of their better offensive teams. And they found a way to score unconventionally. They scored on a fake field goal for a touchdown. They scored on a punt return for a touchdown, and they ended up winning the game 33-24. And that was the year that Oklahoma beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, the infamous Trevor Knight game. So you take a lot away from that game. If nothing else, Oklahoma State came in as the prohibitive favorite. Oklahoma was not as good offensively, but Oklahoma found a way to get some points on the board, found a way to win, found a way to be competitive in that game, and I think found a way to score unconventionally, which is something that Oklahoma might have to get into a situation of. So, I think your comments about Gundy is I think it's something that has to eat at him. I mean, I would assume he grew up with this rivalry. His brother coaches at Oklahoma, has been in Oklahoma forever as well. Almost the same amount of time that Gundy has been at Oklahoma State. So I know this is something that probably has to eat at him, and realizes I got to get this. I've got to get this win, and maybe this year's is a better time or as good of a time as any, given where they're at and where Oklahoma's at right now.